Every single game. Manchester United, Ben White, Kai Havertz. Leeds United, Saka, Odegaard. Liverpool, William Saliba. Forest, Odegaard again. Manchester City, Madueke. Can we not catch a break? Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal News Show, joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you so much, as always, for making this a part of your morning routines. It is greatly appreciated. I hope you had a really solid start to your week. It is Tuesday now, and it means, of course, with it being match day tomorrow, that it is press conference day as well. So we'll be hearing from Mikel Arteta a little bit later on today, and of course, we'll be discussing that in tomorrow morning's show, exactly what has been said. But we'll look ahead to that presser as well today and think about what indeed might be discussed. But this is basically, as Yannick says here, this is basically becoming the Arsenal injury show at this point. It feels like we've got a new player to talk about every single day, which is very true. Matt G, good morning to you, to Steve, to Ken, to other Steve as well. We've got Glenn and Claire, we've got Martin and Black Sharm, we've got Paul, we've got Nakul, sorry, in the chat box. We've got Mark, we've got Southport Gooner, we've got Paul, Franklin in the chat, we've got Jean and Barry and GZ4 and plenty more of you guys and girls as well. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. And I hope you've had a really good start to your week as usual. That your weekend was good otherwise, or rather other than the result as well at the weekend, which was, it wasn't great, was it? It was annoying, it was frustrating, it was the reality that we find ourselves in, but we move, and who knows, maybe that point that Arsenal won ends up being the point that wins them the title. I guess we'll have to wait and see. I do want to point you in the direction of the Red Lines and Half Spaces podcast. It was the podcast that I joined yesterday. It was an absolute pleasure to head over there and speak to Yamin and all the guys, and I think that it is certainly an underrated podcast, an under-listened podcast. So go and check it out. I have retweeted it on my Tom Canton Media X page, so you can go and check it out there, and I'll leave a link to that as well in today's video description for the YouTube link as well, so you can go and give that a listen after, of course, you've finished listening to today's show. So make sure you go and check that out as well. Right, let's jump straight into today's stories. If you could drop a like, of course, I would be greatly appreciative of that as well. And if you could indeed subscribe if you are new, the usual YouTubey stuff. Claire says you should change your name to Tom Canton Medical. Yes, that would work for the Twitter handle, wouldn't it? Because it does feel like I'm just constantly doing medical updates at this stage. I might need to go and get some kind of medical qualification at this point to be able to talk more realistically about what's going on. We'll kick off with the Ballon d'Or celebrations. Arsenal women won the Women's Club of the Year award for 2025. Of course, European champions for their victory over Barcelona in the final in Lisbon. Brilliant achievement, of course, of Renee Slegers and the entire women's side. What a achievement it was. Sadly kind of overshadowed in some ways by the disappointment on the men's side for many, and I don't think it necessarily got the credit that it deserved, because it really was an amazing game. I remember pacing around the living room watching the game through my television screen, probably about the same height. I don't know about you, like we've got our TV mounted on the wall in the living room, and I was walking and pacing around the living room just at the TV at kind of head height, just waiting for the seconds to tick down for Arsenal to lift the Champions League. What a day it was. Both of Williamson and Chloe Kelly were in the top 10, Williamson finishing 7th and Kelly finishing 5th. However, the controversy comes from Bon Mati, who was awarded the Women's Ballon d'Or first place trophy over both of Mariona Caldente and Alessia Russo. Alessia Russo, who in particular, of course, was playing and won both the Champions League and the European Championship final for England as well. Yet Bon Mati, of course, who is a brilliant player, there's no getting around that, and she is an amazing footballer, but the ridiculous nature of what was won by Mariana Caldente and, of course, Alessia Russo as well. I just cannot get my head around how... Well, I can get my head around it. It's the Barcelona tax. That's all that it is. But it's an incredibly disappointing moment for women's football. And the Ballon d'Or always rings out very much as a popularity contest, but very frustrating, very annoying. I knew of, like, from the men's side, of course, was Ousmane Dembele winning the men's awards. I'm aware of kind of like propaganda campaigns going on, trying to like drum up interest in individuals to win the competition. It is just nuts. And as usual with these things, unfortunately, it is a very frustrating thing, because the women's game is one that is growing. And even though you've got kind of idiots like this in the chat box still, we ignore them as much as we feasibly can. But I always think it's worth highlighting them because they are literally losers. But when it comes to the women's game, it is a huge part of course, the Arsenal culture, and the success that they have in the sport is just absolutely overshadowing the men's side of the game for Arsenal, and has done for a very, very long time indeed. And we're very, very proud of their achievements as well. Moving into the men's side of the Ballon d'Or, and Declan Rice finished 27th on the list. Of course, there wasn't any space for the likes of William Saliba and Bukayo Saka as well. Bukayo Saka not on the list this year, of course, with that significant injury that he did suffer. But Declan Rice finished 27th. Victor Gyökeres finished 15th and won the Gerd Müller Trophy for becoming the world's best centre forwards of the last year as well. Very impressive achievement, of course, for his brilliant goal returns for Sporting over the last 2 seasons as well. And what I will say is that it's the evidence that Arsenal need to show you what is capable and what this player is capable of, and what Arsenal need to do in order to find the next level of that position. Arsenal have to adapt. As I said before, I think I said it on the podcast yesterday with Yem, was that it is without a doubt 80% an Arsenal problem, 20% a Gyökeres problem. That it's far greater that it is indeed Arsenal's system that needs to adapt and change to Gyökeres. I will say that I think that the schedule at the start of this season again is the primary reason behind that, and it's no surprise that he's got 3 goals in 2 games against the sides like Forest and Leeds so far. I don't think that's surprising at all. So as long as Arsenal continue to adapt to him, and he continues to adapt to Arsenal, we will see the Gyökeres that won this trophy very much at the club as well. Congratulations to him. In terms of a loan latest, Arsenal posted all the latest in regards to Arsenal's players that are currently out away from the club as well. Jakub Kiwior getting a clean sheet for Porto in their 3-0 win over Rio Ave. Alexander Zinchenko unfortunately scored an own goal in his game at the weekend, which obviously was something of a frustration. I don't know if anyone saw it, but it was rather comical. Reece Nelson made his bow for Brentford, scoring in a penalty shootout to eliminate Aston Villa from the Carabao Cup for Fulham. However, he was not in the squad for the game against Fulham, for Brentford against Fulham on the weekend. Karl Hein was an unused substitute in Werder Bremen's 3-0 defeat to Freiburg. Karl Hein, the number 2 keeper at the German side this season. Ismail Kabir played the full match for Shrewsbury Town on Saturday as Shrewsbury were beaten by Harrogate Town 2-0. Lucas Nygaard made his debut for Danish second division side Brabant in their 3-2 defeat by Skive. Maldini Kukuri helped Morecambe win their first game in 6 as they beat Wealdstone. You want Sham? In a 4-1 thriller to move them up to the 22nd place in the National League. And in the Women's Super League, Rosa Cavaggi enjoyed a superb day on Sunday for Brighton and Hove Albion, scoring and assisting in a 4-1 win over West Ham, while Michelle Adjeman played the full 90 minutes for the Seagulls in their victory on the South Coast as well. But the key takeaway was Fabio Vieira, who made a big start to his time at Hamburg, and he assisted Ryan Philippe on the 59th minute for what turned out to be the decisive and winning goal in a 2-1 win over Heidenheim. So a good start to Fabio Vieira's career in an Arsenal shirt while away from the club. But the headline story of today, and the one that's taken kind of all the attention, I had a day off yesterday, so I wasn't covering this story, and I'll do more digging around it, of course, today. And we'll hear from Mikel Arteta, of course, also today and get the details on this. But Noni Madueke, the player who, of course, came off at half-time against Manchester City, we are aware that he came off with an injury. We're aware that he limped through the mix zone after the game. But it seems that the extent of the injury is not just a knock, which is obviously something of frustration. And there is an understanding that he is set to endure a little bit of time off the pitch. But we don't know how long that time is yet to be. There were initial thoughts, or rather fears, I guess, that it was a serious injury. Unfortunately, there were some, in my opinion, right? You can't stop ITKs. You can't stop faceless, nameless accounts from doing what they do. You know, some people have connections, some people have jobs that allow them into certain areas of the club. Some people have friends or friends of players or friends of family of players, and sometimes you get little tips. But why on earth anybody feels the need to kind of whip up a storm and whip up fear without being 100% certain about what it is? If you want to break a story that a player has suffered a problem and they're undergoing scans, there's absolutely no problem with that at all. But the reason why, and I don't mind naming the guy, Con Marble Halls needs to feel the reason to turn around and say that there are fears of an ACL when that has not been the case. There isn't a situation where that is the fear, and that there are scans just to assess the extent of damage, just whips up a storm on social media. And it also, what it does is it generates the negative kind of viral discussion around the player. Noni Madueke has endured a really difficult start to life at Arsenal before he even kicked a ball. And there's a lot of people basically waiting and that are primed to just basically turn around and say, I told you so, it was a waste of money, blah, blah, blah. And there was just no consideration whatsoever for that element of the discussion. If you've got some information, first of all, double check it, triple check it, especially when it's something as serious as an injury. Fair play for getting a scoop. You know, it's a part of journalism. That isn't journalism when you're going around stoking the flames and saying things that aren't accurate. That's not the same. That's just clout chasing for me at the end of the day. And thankfully, of course, a lot of the people that are in the business did some real digging around it and obviously discovered that there are scans going on, but Ben Jacobs breaking that there isn't, despite those rumours, fears of an ACL. We will hear from Mikel Arteta later on today and get more details around the aspect. And why, if this was like a first case incident, I probably wouldn't be talking about it in this matter. But the reality is that it's not the first time that this has happened. And it's not the first time that it's been inaccurate or slightly off base or even just completely wrong. So that's why there is a frustration, not just by me, but I think by a lot of supporters who are just a little bit fed up of misinformation and just not the entire reality of what's going on. If you get information, report what you know is factual. If you know the player's got an injury, but they're going for scans, report that. But adding context that doesn't need to be added when we don't know if that's the case or whether you're not 100% sure if it's the case just generates unnecessary. Now, I don't want you all to now go and tweet this guy. It doesn't, it's not worth doing. It's just so irritating, I think, for people that misinformation and hyperbole gets added to a story. Could have been a really good scoop. Could have got you a lot of credit. But instead, it's whipped up hyperbole online. And it's, as I say, it's not the first time that it's happened. But it is. Let's talk about the actual news itself. Noni Madueke is and has been a really important asset for Arsenal over the start of this season with Bukayo Saka. And I guess that, the element of the story that matters most is that Bukayo Saka's back. Bukayo Saka is back in the squad. And if we are to miss Madueke for even a short spell or a longer extended spell, and as again, we don't know at this stage what that is until we find out more from Arteta today. However, there is, you're said to be hope that it won't be too long of a time. Jacob Steinberg in The Guardian reporting yesterday that there is hope that it's not going to be a long spell. Jacob reports Madueke set for tests on the injury suffered against City, but there are hopes that the Arsenal winger has not suffered significant damage. So there's hopes and optimism that it's not too bad. I hope that that is the case. But of course, Bukayo Saka returning gives Arsenal that much more depth. And also, Max Dowman has to be considered here, and it could be an opportunity which again gets Max Dowman more so minutes. And I don't think Saka should be starting. Maybe he should be playing minutes on Wednesday night. I think people say, why would you start him against Port Vale? Why would you play Saka against Port Vale? But it's also important when a player returns from injury, that they build up that match fitness. And cup games can be great opportunities, for that. They can be great opportunities to build up your fitness, strengthen the muscles, strengthen the joints, strengthen everything in your game. And I think Max Dowman getting an opportunity, of course, to play also. And we also have Ethan Waneri, it's worth pointing out as well, who could also, in certain situations, provide some depth too. So there are options for Arsenal, and that comes with the depth that we now have in this group. But we wish Noni a speedy recovery and hope that it is indeed not too serious. Right, we're going to part 2 now. Your questions and more right after this. We don't like hyperbole here. We don't like things being taken out of context. We don't like things not being as they are. And what I mean by that, of course, is perhaps you might be surfing the internet. I don't know. Maybe you're doing so in the confidence that the Wi-Fi service, maybe it's a hotel Wi-Fi, maybe it's a public Wi-Fi, so maybe you're somewhere in a cafe or somewhere and you're thinking, I thought this was safe. I thought this was secure. I thought I was fine. Well, you might not be. And why would you ever take that risk? Because you don't need to. Because what you could do instead of that is, of course, go to NordVPN and get yourself a significant discount off a 1 or a 2-year plan. And you get 4 months extra for running free on top of that 2-year deal, of course, as well. And there's a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're happy, or rather not happy with the service, whatever reason. I don't know why you wouldn't be. But if indeed you're not happy with it, there's that 30-day money-back guarantee right there to give you that peace of mind. So keep yourself safe online. Change your geolocation digitally if you need to. It's a superpower in 2025 that can be yours by going, of course, to nordvpn.com/Gooner to get yourself that significant discount as well. Right, let's talk about your questions in part 2, shall we? Let's tackle some of your thoughts, some of your comments, some of your questions and more. Space Monkey says, hi, Tom. Is Hincapié injured or is he just lacking match fitness? Well, again, it's going to be a question that we find an answer to today from Arteta. The suggestion was at the game, the weekend, was that he had a slight issue or had a knock or something that he wasn't able to be in the squad. Hopefully, it was only minor, and now indeed he can return to action because it would be good to see him play as much as possible on Wednesday night. So let's wait and see. Leroy says, I want your opinion, Tom. I've spoken to a few fans who went to the game and they have all said the atmosphere was very poor once the team news came out. Is Arteta misreading the room? I think this is a really interesting point. And I also heard this on the Arsecast as well. I think James brought this up, that the atmosphere had a real kind of element to it that you could sense people were not enthused about the team. That they were, when they recognised that, the atmosphere was somewhat flatter than it otherwise would have been. And I think that's the case at Anfield as well. There was, not to the atmosphere, of course, because we were playing away from home, but the atmosphere just within the fans, online, anyone you spoke to, all of that, I think, certainly played into it. And I think it's a lesson for Arteta. I really hope that he is someone that recognised that, could see that, and in the future recognises as well that you can get the fans on side by picking a front foot 11. It's kind of the way I've started to describe it, a front foot 11, a team that really wants to go for it, take the handbrake off. That's what we want to see. So, yeah, I think Leroy is absolutely a fair point. If says, doesn't Max Dowman have school this week? Can't see how he plays tomorrow if that's the case. So, obviously, football clubs have support for players in terms of their educational needs. So, I don't know if you're joking or not, but yes, of course, young players do have education programs that they follow, but they do that around their football duties as well. So, don't you worry about his education. He's in very good hands at Arsenal, that's for sure. And AFC DMB says, I felt deflated on the way to the stadium after seeing the team sheet. Yes, indeed. Ollie says, here we go again. In what sense, here we go again? I'd love to know. What's here we go again about this? Oh, let's get rid of this guy. Let's go to K West says, is this the manager's job to pick the team he thinks gives us the best chance of winning, not one that appeases the fans? Yeah, it is. But I think all of us recognise as well that the team that was picked for the game against Manchester City was not the one that we felt was the one that would give us the best chance of winning. And I think that obviously played out on the day as well. Backen says, do you think our medical condition departments seem like one in, one out policies at the moment? Again, I always kind of warn people away from the conspiracies about medical teams. Arsenal are just and have been very unfortunate when it comes to injuries. The club invests millions in sports scientists and strength and conditioning coaches. If you think that it's something to do with them, I just don't know what to tell you. Andy says, I've never been Arteta out, but if he can't set basic team building qualities for balance's sake, he deserves eventually to be gone. Well, Andy, I don't think Arteta's kind of managerial status is going to be determined about the games against Man City and Liverpool. We've kind of talked about that. Both of those games could have easily gone either which way. A single goal or two, of course, in the case of, I mean, to be fair, a single goal could have changed either of those two results. They were very tight affairs, and they do tend to be very tight affairs as well. You know, it's very anomalous that you do see those 5-1 results in games. There was a brilliant tweet yesterday I was going to draw your attention to, actually, that I think gives you kind of an insight into the expectations of fans and what is not realistic about our expectations around the game. So let me see if I can find it. James Ben's tweeted it. Where is it? Come on. Don't say you've deleted it, Benji. I don't think he has. XG. Where is it? Where's the tweet about? Here we go. So there was a tweet from not even a madly followed account on Twitter that says, does anyone know the last time we created more than 2 XG from open play? Now, when you look at that question, you might go, that's a really fair question. You know, Arsenal don't tend to create too many chances. You know, the XG is, you know, if for those that don't know, expected goals, and, you know, looking at how much teams create and how dominant they are. It's a really good point. So when's the last time that Arsenal created more than 2 XG from open play in a game? Well, the answer to that question is against Liverpool in May of this year. That game that we drew 2-2 at Anfield. That was the last time Arsenal created more than 2. It was 2.16 XG. That's the last time Arsenal created that. So what are your thoughts about that? Just before I go on, what are your thoughts about that? The last time Arsenal created 2.16 or more than 2 XG from open play was in that game at Anfield in May. So it's not like it's years ago or months ago. It's months in the context of the season, but obviously in the terms that football's open for, you go back September, August, and then May. So within the last 3 months, Arsenal created 2 XG or more from open play. What's your thoughts around that? Because I'm very curious to get people's kind of perception around what the expectation is for a side like Arsenal, how much they should be creating in the context of not just that, but also in how much teams create in general. Your Liverpools, your Manchester Cities, your so on and so forth. What is the expectation around that as well? Aloss says that was the last game that Martinelli played at centre forward. And Ballon says that's a problem. One Tom Soup says Liverpool are at home in a very open attacking team who already won the title. That's my initial thoughts on that. Amaragona says after Sunday, Tom, I asked myself, is Wenger back stubborn and never wrong again? Claire says, how often do other teams create over 2 XG from open play against us? And Temi says it's a little too low. Let me finish the tweet from James now. So the last time Arsenal created more than 2 XG from open play was May 11th. Since then, the following teams have created 2+ XG from open play in a Premier League game. Here's the list. No one. Not a single Premier League team has created more than 2 XG from open play since that game. So what this tells us is obviously it tells us something about expectation. It tells us something about numbers as well. It tells us something about data and kind of what we expect from um, from those numbers and from those games that we experience. I think people's expectation around football in 2025 is just beyond realism, beyond what actually can happen. It can happen. And obviously, you have got examples where it's happened, and Arsenal are the last team to do it, it turns out, if indeed James's numbers from Opta, by the way, are correct. And that's a really interesting moment, I think, to kind of assess that so far this season and at the end of last season after that game at Anfield, which I think was the penultimate match of the campaign, maybe there's a word, isn't it, for the third before the third last? I think there's a special, is it? I can't remember what the word is, but there is a word for it specifically. I think we talked about it last season. That's for me, I think, shows you something about the expectations. And I think if you kind of rewound 5 years or so, even 3 years maybe, from an Arsenal point of view, about how football is played and what the expectations around games are, I think that there are expectations that Arsenal should just blow every team away that they play. Now, the irony, of course, is that the two other teams that Arsenal played at home this season, they have blown away. 3-0 against Forest, 5-0 against Leeds. They've won at Manchester United on the opening day, which is never a nice place to go, especially on the opening day when you're still integrating your players into the squad. And then, of course, at Anfield, they played a game which easily could have gone either other way. I think yesterday we discussed in detail that the reason why Arsenal didn't win against City was down to Mikel Arteta beyond anything else, and the selection that wasted 45 minutes in that game. But I think that maybe there is over-analysis. I think there is over-analysis about the games against Liverpool and Manchester City. Those games are always really tight. We talked yesterday about how, that the teams that have won the title in the last 2 seasons did not beat Arsenal in any of those 4 games that they played against them home and away in the league. They didn't beat them. That's the teams that win the league aren't winning the league because of how they performed against the team that finished runners-up. The team that won the league are winning the league because they were more successful and more consistent over the other 17 teams that were involved in the competition. So that's ultimately what I think Arsenal need to focus on this season. And ultimately, if we're looking at that this season, obviously Arsenal have got a 100% record so far of the 17 other sides. They've beaten United, they've beaten Forest, they've beaten Leeds. And as long as that stays up for now, then we're golden. But the problem is that we still have a lot more football to go. We still don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen at Newcastle. We don't know what's going to happen in the run of games that we've got coming up either. The expectation that you can win every single game, obviously, is very, very difficult to expect. The maximum number of points any team, of course, can achieve in the league is 114, I think. You can only drop 15 points, or rather 14 points if you want to get to a centurion state like Manchester City did. So that's a really interesting bit of context that I saw yesterday from James, which I think was very welcome and certainly made me feel a lot better kind of about the expectations of fans, about what on earth the expectation should be around Arsenal and how we're playing, particularly against the teams that we should be beating relatively comfortably, because it turns out we are. Martin says, unpopular opinion. I like pragmatic Arteta in the big games. I remember our woeful record in the end days of Wenger and Emery and Mikel's first couple of seasons. I'd rather take a tight 1-0 win. And this is a really interesting point as well, is that I think people quickly forget what Arsenal's record was against those sides. I think it's very quickly forget. And I think we take it for granted, actually, our record against these big 6 teams. Maybe it's a case of we're just forgetting. Maybe it's a case of there's a contingent of younger supporters in the fan base that didn't live through those periods, of course, during the 2010s, where our record away from home, particularly against the big 6 teams, was horrific. Arsenal have not been this competitive for a very long time. And until that changes again, I don't think there's a need to go over and above and over the top about the analysis of Arsenal right now. So it's painful we didn't win this game. It's painful the way that we selected the team. It's definitely on Arteta why we didn't win the fixture, in my opinion. But the pragmatic and conservative side of things in these games is not something that, for me, is going to be the definitive reason Arsenal do or don't win a title. Langat says, instead of lying to fans, Arteta should accept that he made a disastrous mistake of subbing Madueke instead of swapping. He's injured, mate. I think the disastrous mistake is not realising he's injured. That's probably what the disastrous mistake is. Ant says, I made a note of Gary Neville saying when Van Persie moved to Manchester United where Fergie instilled in his team to give the ball to Van Persie. Do you think Arteta is saying the same? No, I don't think so, because I think football is different. Football has changed, of course, since those times. And Van Persie is a better striker than Gyökeres. I don't think there's much debate to be had around that, even though it's painful for me to say that. But Arsenal do need to find a better way of getting the ball to their number 9 or number 14. There is no doubt about that. That is definitely for sure. And Kel says, I feel like we are a lot better than City to be playing like we did. And I think that this is absolutely a fair criticism. Hence why we've kind of looked at Arteta's selection and criticised it for what it was. Space Monkey says, in the past few seasons against City and Liverpool, we've always fielded a strong lineup at home, even in the 21-22 season when we lost. What led Arteta to approach things differently? I think a number of reasons, and I've kind of touched upon these already. 1, the absence of Odegaard. 2, the start of the season, the fixtures that we've been dealt. And 3, his own fear and his own shortcomings and his own issues that I think we have rightly criticised. So they're kind of the 3 things that I think have led us to be a lot more conservative. And I don't think we've approached things differently this season. Like, if we're talking about this season, what you actually mean is against Liverpool and against City. That's what you actually mean. I think people saying that Arsenal are playing differently this season or are playing conservatively this season have ignored the Leeds game, have ignored the Man United game where Arsenal had those 12 turnovers. Just because the scoreline was tight, just because Man United got in on a couple of occasions on the opening day of the campaign, it doesn't mean that Arsenal's style changes or we've used that, because actually Arsenal should have created a hell of a lot more from what possession they actually had and from the amount of turnovers that they had in that game. It's just the Liverpool and Man City games, which are always, other than kind of these one-off random games like we saw in the 5-1 win, they always tend to be pretty tight affairs, tightly contested, separated by a single goal or end in draws. We don't tend to see huge scorelines like the 5-1 from last season. They aren't the norm. So I actually don't think it's a case when we say what led Arteta to approach things differently this season. I don't think he's approached anything really differently at all. I think Arteta's approached the big games very similarly to as before. But if anything, we look a lot more like the 22-23 season against the teams that we should be beating. Hence why we've already scored 8 goals in those 2 games, or 9 goals across 3 games if you include the Manchester United fixture. Clive says, when we beat Man City 5-1, check the XG. I imagine it's not very big, to be fair. Thinking about the goals that we scored in that game, Ethan Waneri scored 1 from far out. Partey scored 1 from far out. So they were going to be very low XG chances. I don't imagine it's very big whatsoever. We just happened to take the opportunities when they fell to us. I still think, Clive, obviously Arteta chose the wrong lineup on the day, was too conservative, and we could have won that game with the different selection. So I'm not too bogged down in the sense of XG about the game. I'm more bogged down about City because of the lineup, because of the selection. That for me was the bigger issue with the game against City. I think it had a negative impact, not just on the way that we played and how it emboldened City. I think it had a negative impact as well on the atmosphere. I think you've got to play the occasion. I think you've got to select for the occasion as well. And I don't think Arteta selected correctly for the occasion at all. He could have really galvanised the crowd behind him by selecting an attacking team. It could have got us on the front foot quicker if we had Eze instead of Marino. I just don't think that's the case. Langat says Arteta is a coward and fearful, negative. He gets worried by the named teams and is a dangerous man. Langat, are you going to completely ignore the mistake that you made earlier on about Noni Madueke? Are you going to completely ignore that before leaving another comment? I can only assume that you are. Paul says, I remember us playing free-flowing football at home last season against Man City. Last season and beating them 5-1. Why go conservative against? Well, I guess, Paul, that the question that Clive is raising there is that the games all that weren't wildly different, because obviously the XG was only 1.53, So for me, I think that this idea that we played open, free-flowing, attacking football against City last season and won 5-1, I don't think is true. I think the scoreline's a bit of a facade that gives us that impression that we absolutely went out and battered them. But the reality is that We scored some goals from long ranges. We took the chances when they came. We did that in quick succession. When Haaland scored, we scored minutes later from range. So, again, I just don't think that it's the case, Paul, that was free-flowing football against City. Even, Miles Lewis-Skelly's goal, where he kind of weaved into the box and then took a shot. It's a low XG chance, and we've never seen a goal like that since then. So, again, it was pretty. It was a lot tighter than the scoreline actually ended up being, and even though it was still an anomalous result, I just don't think that it's an accurate description. Novice racer driving a Ferrari is crazy. I don't know what you're talking about, Trevorelli. I'm sorry, I'm not following. Kevin says, I think Arteta has a bit too much faith in Mourinho off the back of the international duty. I would agree with you. I sincerely hope that he doesn't start Mourinho in Newcastle. I think it's a team that we can afford. I know if Ødegaard is back, I think Ødegaard will start. But if he's not back, I think Eze should start. Abdul says, hey, Tom, with Newcastle away in mind, can you see Arteta resting Gyökeres? And if so, can you see a world where Martinelli plays at striker against Port Vale? I got a weird feeling that Mourinho might play at centre forward or Trossard before Martinelli does. I think Gyökeres needs to be given a rest. And I think the fact he was in France for the Ballon d'Or is probably a good indication that he's going to be given a rest as well. So, I would probably lean towards Gyökeres being rested for the game on Wednesday night. Tom, do you think our training method says 6-0, the pitch and the former car park have anything to do with the amount of injuries? No, I don't. I've spoken to former players who played on those pitches, and no, I don't think so. I think that comment that was said by Ian Wright years ago has been completely whipped up into a storm that in reality I don't think is the case. No, I've spoken to people who have trained on those pitches, and no, the answer is people who don't play at Arsenal anymore, aren't there anymore. I've spoken to them. No, that's never been the case. Ken says, I heard somewhere that City's 32% possession was the lowest Pep has had in 601 top-tier matches as manager, and their 8 touches in our box was also the lowest he's had in the Premier League. It shows our dominance on the day. This is the thing about Arteta, right? Arteta is a probability manager. Arteta's style is all about dominance and control and creating a game or having a game where you give yourself the highest probability chance of winning. If you've got more of the ball, and if you limit your opponent to less of the ball and less of the chance in the box, and you give yourself more chance in the opposition box or around the box, necessarily the probability leans on you being the more likely team to win it. And you often hear that from Arteta in his post-match press conferences as well. You hear phrases like, we deserved to win it. We were the more dominant team. I don't know how they deserved it. They didn't do anything else other than the goal they scored. And the problem is that I don't think that is enough for Arsenal to get to where they want to go. It's enough for Arsenal to get to where they've got to, which is back established among the title challengers. But Arsenal need to evolve. Arsenal need to take that next step. Arsenal need to take the next level. And for me, that is going to be about taking the handbrake off. It is going to be about surrendering a little bit of that control and rigidity. And it is going to be about unleashing the potential in us. It might mean that we concede 1 or 2 or 3 more goals across the next 6, 7, 8 games. But it will hopefully mean that Arsenal considerably improve in attack and score more goals and are more dominant in other ways, like the number of goals they actually score. So that's, for me, the next step for Arsenal. I have worries that isn't going to happen. That's my biggest concern about Arteta. My biggest concern about Arteta is that he doesn't evolve, is that we don't evolve, is that we don't go to the next level. Yes, things are changing, but I think the changes that people witness, even when they rewatch games, are as a result of the different personnel. We've had so many changes to the squad, so many transfers to this team, that to sit there and say, oh, I can already see big changes in the way that we're playing, sure, you will. But that mainly at this stage of the season comes about as a result of the differences in personnel more than anything else. And I think reading a little bit more deeply into that probably take things a little bit into the over-analysis side of things. For me, we won't know if Arteta's team has evolved until about Christmas. We won't know if the changes that have made have not only changed things on an independent level, but beyond that into kind of a team level until Christmas. And that's why there's no point having some hyperbolous and over the top analysis and comments made about this team at this point in time. I don't know if Arsenal are going to win the league with this current setup, and I won't know until later on down the line. And no one knows whether they are yet. You can theorize or hyperbolize or hyperbolize. What's the word? What is hypothesize? That's the word. But you can't be definitive about it at this point for me. Eva says, to say he doesn't evolve is wild. Well, I don't know is the answer. I don't know if we're going to see the next evolution yet, because I don't think we've seen enough football to know whether that's going to happen. Bazza says, the possession stat drives me crazy. If you play around the block and backwards and sideways, you have a lot of the ball. It's what you do with that should count, and the chances created, etc. The chances that Arsenal are creating are there, but at the moment we're not creating the right type of chances for the centre forward that we've got in those particular games against your Liverpools, your Cities, your United. So we're not creating the type of chances for that centre forward. That said, if Havertz was fit, I think Havertz will be starting in those games, because he's just more suited to those types of games, whereas Gyökeres is more suited to the teams that we've struggled to beat, that we should be beating, and that have ultimately cost us. That's the difference that Gyökeres is going to bring us this season, is the idea that we sign Gyökeres is not that he would be the number 9 in every single game that we play. He was additive to what we already had in Havertz. But the idea that when we lose games at home to West Ham and we drop points away to Fulham, we drop points to these teams that we should not be dropping points to, Gyökeres is the difference for those games. He's the difference that gets you on the end of the chance, because we are going to be more dominant in the sense of chance creation, and we are going to create better level chances in those matches that Havertz unfortunately doesn't have the finishing edge that Gyökeres does in those moments. But what Havertz is really good at in the games where we're against your Cities, your Liverpools, you're away to Chelsea, away to United, away to Spurs in some cases, as we saw in the North London derby where Havertz was excellent, of course, at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. In these types of games, these are the ones where Havertz is important, because he drops in and he drags players out of position. He makes more interesting runs. He links up play with the wide players, and obviously he links more so that Ødegaard's style of play changes. But when you've got kind of a tip of the spear number 9, you have to play a different way. And unfortunately, at the start of the season, when you've barely played any football for your new club, that's going to be very different when you've got to play against Liverpool and Man City and Man United away from home in the opening 5 games. And I think maybe at Newcastle, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. I'm organized. Tom, does Slot's comments on injury time prove he talks rubbish like Arteta, but is never brought to task, guys? I mean, they don't get brought to task like Arsenal do. No one does, mate. It's just how it works. Benny says, what do you think of the way Liverpool and City have played against us? It seems to be a different approach, telling us to have the ball. No, I think they're much more conservative against Arsenal. If there's one thing, if there's one thing we've learned about City and Liverpool and the other big teams about how they play Arsenal, is that they fear Arsenal. Arsenal are, yes, I think they get encouragement by seeing Mikel Merino in the starting 11. There's no doubt about that. I think that's a fair comment to make. But there's no doubt in my mind in the way that both Liverpool and City have faced Arsenal is that they fear them. But Arsenal are feared as a team. Arsenal are a team that can beat anybody. And they know that. And they know to get a result, sometimes you've got to try and produce a moment of magic to get a goal, like we saw in the Liverpool game, or you've got to rely on a bit of a defensive mistake and a strong counter-attack like we saw against Manchester City. If we don't make that mistake, if Gabriel's not caught high up, we don't see the ball turned over, City don't win that game, City don't even get a draw, I don't think, in that game. I think that goal, unfortunately, has overpowered the entire fixture. It's similar to the Liverpool game, where a magic free kick has overpowered the entire fixture and ultimately taken the context of the Anfield game way out of it. And I was completely kind of masked from seeing the broader picture of that Liverpool game for about 48 hours, I think. The defeat stung so much at Anfield, and the context of the 11 that was chosen really did, I think, mask the bigger picture of that Anfield game for a good 48 hours until I was ready to kind of calm down look at the game again, watch the game again, see how we were the better team by far in the first half, and then sadly just made some errors in the second half that we didn't build upon. And that falls on the manager. He didn't make the more proactive changes. He didn't make the pragmatic differences in the second half to get it. But still, in both of those games, you can point to the starting 11 as why ultimately we didn't fulfill perhaps our full potential in both of those fixtures. Carl says, as long as we know that we can guarantee we can beat all of those teams, we didn't usually beat the likes of Newcastle, West Ham, Aston Villa. I'm calm. The Newcastle game is so key. It is really key. If Arsenal beat Newcastle this weekend, as I've been saying, there'll be net 2+ on the points from the games that they've played from the previous season. So let's just hope that we can get the result that we need in a very, very difficult stadium. Miles says, do you think it's fear of them wanting us to have the ball because they know we won't have enough creativity against a low block? Well, Miles, we know that we do because we have beaten them. We scored what? In the games that we played against City last season, we scored 7 goals. And against Liverpool, we scored 4, I think. Was it 2-2 at the Emirates last season as well? Arsenal, Liverpool, head-to-head. I disagree. Let's scroll down. It was last season 2-2. Yeah. So Arsenal scored 4 goals against Liverpool last season, and they scored 7 goals against Man City. So that's 11 goals in 4 games against Liverpool and Man City. So far this season, they've scored 1 in those 2 games, and it's because that other team are taking a different approach to those games. They have taken a very different approach to how they've played against Arsenal. And as a result, they have gotten different results against Arsenal, other than Liverpool. Well, no, they've gotten different results. Man City lost last season. They've got the draw this time. Liverpool drew last season. They've got a win this time from a very fortunate moment, of course. So they have changed the way they played against Arsenal because the way in which they approached the games last time around, conceded 11 times in just 4 matches. George though says, I really disagree, Tom. I can't lie. They don't fear us. They think that in a deep build-up when Zubi and Rice are on the ball, they don't fear us at all. They just protect the middle. I don't agree with you, George. I think that you're right to point out the way that they play is different, but they do that because they fear what Arsenal are capable of. You wouldn't make those changes if you didn't have a fear about what Arsenal can produce. And the reason that they have that fear is because they both, between them, conceded those 11 goals in 4 matches last time out. If they didn't fear, if there was no fear, mate, they wouldn't have changed things. They would have done what they did before and believed in that process and believed, of course, that they were doing the right thing and were just unlucky. But they didn't. They recognised that what they were doing, and rather what Arsenal were doing, cost them so greatly that they had to change things. Pep Guardiola had the lowest possession ever in 601 matches. The lowest number of touches in an opposition box in his entire Premier League managerial career. Those changes that lead to that setup is not done through anything other than being fearful of what your opponent is capable of. It just isn't. It just isn't done in any other way. You don't make that drastic kind of change unless you have a significant concern about what your opposition can do. And he says, what Arsenal can produce does not happen because the manager's philosophy is differently. It does maximum points. Sorry, I'm not following, Andy. Eva says, just because we're not yet inevitable doesn't mean other teams don't know that we are very good, which is definitely fair. D says, the stats still equated to 1 point each, though, in terms of the Man City game. Yeah, I mean, the Man City game is and comes about, that draw comes about as a result of Arsenal's selection in the first half. And obviously the approach of Manchester City. That's what brings about that point. It's our approach in the first half, the fact we wasted 45 minutes and we won the second half because of 2 things. The changes that we made and the changes that Pep made. Pep went to a 5-5-0 at the end of the game by taking Erling Haaland off, invited more pressure on himself. If he had kept Haaland on the field, I think Pep probably would have won the game. But he made a mistake. And Arsenal were able then to take off Timber and, put Martinelli on and bring on Waneri for a tired Trossard. And in the first half, Arteta got it wrong with the changes that he made. Well, not the lack of changes that he made to his starting 11. And Pep obviously managed to get the counter-attacking style spot on and get that goal. So it's as simple as that for me. The game is a game of two halves, and had Arsenal and Arteta have picked a more proactive 11 in the first half, I don't think we would be talking about us dropping points in this game. I think the overriding consensus is that the primary reason Arsenal didn't beat Man City is Arteta's selection. That has to be the overriding consensus. And by the way, again, I want to point this out. I said this yesterday. Mikel Merino is not the reason. Him as a footballer, him as an individual, is not the reason that Arsenal lost the game. Mikel Merino is a good player who, unfortunately, by people who just don't get it, just don't really get what type of player he is. And unfortunately, he's become something of a victim of the system that Arteta put him into. Mikel Merino has been a good signing for Arsenal. He produced some fantastic performances last season when we were in a dire time of need. You know, the fact that Arsenal reached the Champions League semi-final is in part because of his contributions. He scored against Real Madrid, scored against Liverpool at Anfield. You know, this is a guy that does score in big moments. Scored against Liverpool at the Emirates as well, you'll remember. So it's not on Merino. It's on the structure that he is picked to play in, and therefore what that gives us, or doesn't give us, more importantly. Mark, thank you for your kind donation. Liverpool have a smaller squad. They are in the same competitions as us, but have less injuries. Do you think Arteta knows how to rotate the squad properly? I think it's just, unfortunately, there is just an RNG element to this. There is sadly just an RNG element to this. Arsenal have rotated quite considerably this season. I don't know how many different back fours we've played with, how many front threes we've played with, how many different middle threes we've played with this season, but in the first 5 games in the league, we've played very, very high variety of different 11s over the course of this season so far. So I don't think it's anything to do with rotation. I think it's RNG, to be honest, at the moment. And Liverpool, of course, sometimes you just go through seasons where you have significant numbers of injuries. In 23-24, Arsenal didn't really suffer too many problems. We did last season. And Liverpool, of course, ended up finishing, I think, 4th or 5th during the season a few years ago when they had their major injury crisis as well. Eddie says, we got 2 points from the next 4 games in the previous season. Shouldn't we be comparing equivalent fixtures in 23-24, or at least 22-23, rather than a season that we drew 14 games? Well, I guess it depends upon, a lot of factors. It depends upon how you want to measure it against the teams involved in that season, because in 23-24, it's a very different campaign. You're 2 years ago. Football changes, the teams change, the opposition change, who you're going up against changes against. So no, I think we have to measure it against last season, because ultimately that's the Liverpool. The closest thing that we have to beat is the Liverpool from last season. That's the closest that we have to beat. The points totals from 23-24 are not going to be the points totals, I don't think, that we see win the league this season. So no, I don't think we compare it to those previous campaigns. You can only compare it to what you did last season and the net gains from that previous campaign, because the 2 years ago is completely different. Teams are different. The players are different. The oppositions are different. The teams, how they play you, are different. You can only go from the most recent comparable value, in my view. Biko says, Tom, what do you think about the media praise of Pep's when Arteta was slated for being defensive when playing about the Etihad and the Av? I don't really have an opinion on it, because I think to dig too deeply into those types of things, you'll just send yourself mad. If you don't understand how Arsenal are viewed by now in the broadcast sense of the media, then you never will. So don't drive yourself mad looking for differences in how teams are talked about, because Arsenal will always be talked about in a certain way. They just will. And he says, Tom, don't you think that 10 London derbies will have an effect on our league challenge? Well, it'll have an effect either in a positive way or a negative way. We don't know yet until those things, of course, happen. So let's wait and see. I think, obviously, the fact Arsenal play in London for so long soon, from October to October 1st until November 1st, we are in London. Arsenal do not leave London in the month of October. Olympiacos at home, West Ham at home, Fulham away, Atletico at home, Crystal Palace at home. And then Burnley kicks off a November of tricky trips, because we've got Burnley away, Slavia Prague away, Sunderland away. By the way, if you're planning on going to that Sunderland game, please check the trains, because they are not running. it is going to be a nightmare for away fans, that Sunderland trip. I'm still not sure what I'm going to do for that game. And then, of course, we get into that after the international break. We've then got Spurs at home, Bayern at home, Chelsea away, which is going to be a very difficult run of fixtures, of course, for Arsenal. But hopefully, again, one that we come through with maximum points. Iso says, can Eza, Martinelli, Odegaard and Saka play together with one DM against the team outside of the top 6? I hope so. I would like to see an attacking midfield pair of Eza and Odegaard together. It's something that I would very much like to see us try in a game this season. Soup says, Kevin, apparently the Man United-Everton game and the Liverpool-Everton game last weekend also produced open play XGs of over 2. I guess we'll have to have a look at the data, won't we? But I'm not sure. Paul says, Liverpool will lose matches if they are only winning by 1 goal or last-minute winners. It's not sustainable. And that's the thing about Liverpool this season, is that they've obviously been very, very fortunate. Very fortunate indeed. Space Monkey says, any chance we can get a live watch along for an Arsenal match? This is not from me, mate. I'm sorry, I'm at all the games. So you're not going to get it from me. D says, to be fair, our first 5 fixtures have been the toughest in the league. United and Liverpool away, plus a resurgent City. Not easy. And he says 5 points are very doable. If it gets 9 points at any point in some games, you can play for cups and Champions League spots. You don't take 10 points off Liverpool. I hate to say it. I guess we'll have to wait and see, Andy, won't we? Biko says, on a serious note, do you think Arteta's approach in these types of games on having the handbrake up, as it's called, will be what leads him to leaving Arsenal? No, as I've said before, I think that Arsenal's make or break will not come in the games against Liverpool and City. I don't think that will be the determining factor of those fixtures. Daz says, I thought when goalkeepers waste time, the opposing team is awarded a corner. Is this correct? How did the goalkeeper get away with it? Well, because he wasn't holding the ball in his hands. The issue with Donnarumma was that he was holding it from the ball being on the floor. The only time that you get a corner is if the goalkeeper has the ball in his hands for longer than 6 seconds. It's a bit silly, and it was never, ever going to be a solution to an ongoing problem. Right, we're going to wrap up today's show there. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. Really appreciate your time. And it's 8 seconds. You're right, Nick, not 6 seconds. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. Really greatly appreciate you being here and listening in, as always. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day. Enjoy yourselves. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.